Great morning, world. Welcome to the Rise Up with Dragon podcast with your host, Dragon.
Get into the float state with Calm Mind meditations and Gia.
Hello and great morning, everyone. This is your boy Dragon. And every time I play that intro, it just reminds me of like who I am. And it's just like 15 years of this thing. And I'm like, I'm the Dragon, man. I love that. So good to see everybody joining us today, and really, really excited about this guest. I say that every time. I've never said I'm really, really bummed about this guest, but this is just another human being that somehow out of the 7 billion people out there, synchronistically, we bumped into each other. We were both sharing the same stage in Colorado. I have to say, I'd never heard about him before. He probably never heard of me. The first time I actually heard about him is when I found out I was doing this gig, and I kind of like looked up the speakers and I learned a little bit about him, and I'm like, oh man, can't wait to hear about that guy. But when he took the stage, let's just say Dragon noticed him. And that's why I asked him to be on the show. So I want to welcome, just quickly, Brian, just jump in. And, the first question I'll ask you, and you can just briefly answer it. What's it like to be Brian Bogert these days?
What's it like to be Brian Bogert? I can tell you, I've never actually been asked that question. So you got me right out of the gate rolling. What it's like to be Brian Bogert. It is literally the middle, neutral, centered ground between crazy, polarized, different amounts of energy. And it's only recently that as my level of consciousness has gotten us to where we are, that I'm allowing wisdom to flow through me instead of having to access knowledge. And so what it's like being Brian Bogert is it can be overwhelming at times. It can be centering at times. It can be calming and neutral and invigorating at times. But I will tell you that I'm a very blessed man. And there isn't a single moment that goes by that I don't count my blessings and pay attention to how grateful I am. I'm a husband, I'm a father, and those are my two most important roles. And so every single morning I get to center myself and my family, and the rest of the day I get to go focus on how do I create impact.
So I think what Brian's trying to say is he's just chilling.
I'm just chilling.
And one of the things when I did my recon and I looked into it, one of the things I resonate with most. I mean, we have a lot of things in common, but it's just plain to see when you dig in, you see that Brian is a very, very much blessed in the family arena, and it's just a great, great dad, and just does so many great things. You'll learn about some of the channels, but I watched a video this morning in preparation of him, making an attempt at camping out in his backyard with his kids. And that's a good one. So Brian, just reading up, I mean, just so you guys know, and you heard the intro before, but he's a professional speaker. This is the way he explains it. And this is, we're going to unpack Brian here. So he's a professional speaker, human behavior and performance coach to execs, entrepreneurs, and athletes. So, very, very congruently connecting the word performance there. But here's what's cool. This is, and this is where we'll jump in. Brian, this is what Brian says he does. And I know he does, but this is the way he explains it. He says he teaches people how to leverage radical authenticity, right? So just who you are. Remember, who you are determines how well what you do works. Radical authenticity and awareness to create the intentional life. Interesting to think about what that means. They've been dreaming of, but have struggled to create. So one of the things that I want to jump right into, because I know this is kind of your wheelhouse before we learn. I mean, he's got an unbelievable story. And I know everybody always says, Brian, tell him your story first. We're going to go to that in a second. But one of the things that I believe is that most everybody, people have limitations on how big they dream, but most everybody kind of knows what they want. You could call it more, you could call it better. Most people could tell you, if given permission, that's not as much the challenge as their execution of the things that need to be done, the obstacles and such. So the way I look at you, Brian, is that I think that Brian is an obstacle remover.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of, just when I marinated on you and I said, what is this guy? I mean, he's got an amazing story and it makes sense why he does what he does. But that's what I perceive. And I want you to speak on that a little bit, is just this concept of how you've learned about obstacles, and we'll feed into the story. But
Yeah.
I think you're an obstacle remover. It's like Brian's the guy that, like, you pull up and there's a red cone, an orange cone that says you can't park here. And Brian's like, yes, you can.
You just gave me goosebumps, brother. For more reasons than one. And I have to just pause and say thank you, because that might be one of the greatest compliments in how someone has described what I do. I would say that's pretty accurate. I would tell you that I've been described as helping giants become legends by helping them grab what's just out of their grasp. And it's no different, right? It's like removing the obstacles. But what I recognize is that so often we believe the obstacles are external, right? So often it's this idea that if, I get a new set of strategy and tactics, if I find a new wheelhouse, a new system to operate under, if I go find my new 7-step system for success, that it's going to allow me to have all the things that I want. It's going to allow me to be who I want. It's going to allow me to live my life in the way that I want. Strategy and tactics are important, but that is not what keeps people stuck. That's not where the obstacles are. And truly, like, those aren't the obstacles that I remove. What is definitive is it is clear to me through working with many, many of the world's highest performers that what keeps us stuck circling the same patterns is a combination of emotional triggers, behavioral patterns, and environmental conditioning. And so what I do, although you describe it as removing obstacles, is I really allow people to see themselves more clearly. I allow them to see where they are the ones that are actually putting that cone right in the spot they want to park in. Because the reality of it is the limitations that we face more often than not are not just what's been placed on us by the world, but the ones that we absorb and then choose to believe through our lens that we view the world through. And so for me, I just help people see that there are not the same limitations that we perceive. And then when we really do the work and we unpack those elements of darkness and trauma and pain and pieces that really cause us to have emotional triggers and change our actions and behaviors at any given moment, it's those things that propel us forward into who we're becoming.
Yeah, you just made me think of a good question that we could ask people that claim that they're stuck. And then you say, well, what's stucking you? And they say this, right? We always will identify the thing. If this wasn't here, then, and rather than removing the obstacle, because Brian just reminded us that, very often it could be mental or physical. I would say more often than not, we create the obstacle, but I like to say, who put that there? Did somebody else put that obstacle there, or has it always been there and you just labeled it as something? Maybe you gave value to it. I love that.
The difficulty for most people answering that question, though, my friend, is that sometimes whoever placed it there might have been 30 years ago, might have been 40 years ago. And so we just assume that this is how we operate. But the reality of it is when we actually can get back to that root and that source of who put it there or what put it there or what happened that maybe made us feel this way, all of a sudden we can start to see it a little bit more clearly and we can move through it with a little bit less effort.
Yeah. And so, which is maybe the question is not who put it there, it's how did it get there?
That's
and
right.
Why is it still there? So perfect insert right there to transition. One thing I know, I always kind of half-heartedly, talk about the fact that, like, Mother Teresa, because of like what we observed her do, she must have like been through some real shit in life, because I find that obstacle removers are people that have somehow been through it, right? We always, anytime I meet somebody like Brian, that's like just got this massive, massive mission to help like so many people. I don't look at what he's trying to do. I look at why he's doing it, right? So let's hear a little bit of that backstory, because it leads into so much of what you learned about life by your own overcoming of obstacles, or embracing them. This will give people a little bit of a better idea about who you are and why you do what you do.
Yeah, I'm actually going to ask you. I haven't done this in a little while, but I feel that the need to lean into it right now. I'm going to ask you and anybody who's listening or watching to just close their eyes for 1 second. And I'll tell you when to reopen them. Of course, if you're driving while you're listening to this, please keep your eyes open. I want you to imagine going to a store, having a successful shopping trip, breezing through the checkout line. You just are going out, you walk out the doors, you have a little pep in your step, you look up, you feel the sun on your skin, you feel a little bit of breeze through your hair, you're going on with your day. As you get up to your car, you go and you start fumbling in your pocket to get the keys to unlock the door, and you turn your head and you see a truck barreling 40 miles an hour right at you with no time to react. Go ahead and open your eyes. That's the beginning of my story. My mom, my brother, and I went to our Walmart to get a one-inch paintbrush. And as we were headed back home, it was not a surprise to anybody that was around. Anybody who's met me for more than 2 minutes has seen the energy and excitement and vigor for life I have. So I was the first one in the car. I wanted to get home and put that paintbrush to use. Now, this was back in the days before there was key fobs. So I had to wait for my mom to literally catch up, stick the physical key in the door, turn it, so we could go on with our day. And as I was standing there was a truck that pulls up in front of the store. And the driver and the middle passenger park and get out, and the passenger all the way to the right feels the truck move backwards. So he did what any one of us would do, Dragon. Scooter would put his foot on the brake, but he instead hit the gas. Something I didn't really think about or realize until the last maybe year is that he probably didn't just put his foot on the brake gently like we would if we're normally going to stop a car. He felt the truck moving backwards. So what did he do? He yanked his knee way up and he slammed it down onto that pedal. Guess what? All that force went into the gas pedal. And it threw him up onto the dash, up onto the steering wheel. And all of a sudden, he's catapulting 40 miles an hour across the parking lot right at us with no time to react. Hits our car, knocks me over, runs over me diagonally, tearing my spleen, leaving an entire track scar on my stomach, and continuing on to completely sever my left arm from my body. So there I am, laying on a parking lot on a 115-degree day in Phoenix, Arizona. Mom and brother watch the whole thing happen, and they look up and see my arm laying 10 feet away. Fortunately for me, my guardian angel was also there that day. There was a nurse that walked out of the store right when this took place, and she saw the literal life and limb scenario in front of her. And I am forever indebted to this woman for her choice to go into action versus going on with her day. She came over and stopped the bleeding on the main wound, and she instructed some innocent bystanders to run inside, grab a cooler, fill it with ice, and get my detached limb on ice within minutes to give me a fighting chance of not only living, but having my limb reattached. So this woman not only saved my life, but she saved my limb. And if it wasn't for her actions, if it wasn't for these things, Dragon, I either wouldn't be here with you today or I'd be here today with a cleaned up stump. And so one thing that I'll just say is I'm sure that your listeners were not expecting it to go there today. But what I have learned in all of my time of doing this is, although I know I have a very unique story, to your whole point, it was like, tell your story, is that we actually all have unique stories. What's important is that we pause and become aware of the lessons we can extract from those stories and then become intentional with how do we apply them in our lives. And so that's really what is the beginning platform for what's propelled us on our mission to impact 1 billion lives by 2045.
1 billion lives. I love, there, and you know what, somebody could say to Brian, like, why so little, but a lot of people are out there, dreaming small. That's a big dream, but it makes sense why he's doing that. I just want to hit on something that I heard you say, because what's interesting is obviously I think you were 7.
I was 7. Yep.
7. Yeah. So just imagine that, put that into context, 7-year-old, and moms and dads out there, look at your kids. So first I noticed that Brian took a lot of time to replay how and why this happened, because he doesn't know what actually happened in the car, but he figured, so it's interesting to see the work that he did there. But I just look at that nurse that came out, because, you said that we all have a story, but we're all that nurse as well going through life.
We are.
And what you said is, for some reason, she was compelled to go into action rather than do what most people do every day, what most of us do every day, and just go on with your day. Yeah. What a valuable lesson there about just looking at the thin line that exists between, a cleaned up stump and an arm.
Well, and my life, honestly. The first ambulance that was called got into a car accident. So the couple of minutes of delay, had she not stopped the bleeding at the main wound, I would have been dead. I mean, a detached major limb, you lose blood very quickly, right? And so her choice not only saved my life, but again, it gave me a fighting chance of having my arm. So had she not gone into action, I likely wouldn't be here with you today.
So technically, shouldn't she be the CEO of your company?
she's one of the primary motivators for me to continue to focus on if and how I can help and make sure that I don't turn my head when I've got the opportunity to go into action.
It's amazing. So one of the things, I just love the way I believe that everything that we need to succeed and all the lessons, they already exist and we've heard them in piecemeal, but certain people like Brian have ways, call it a good book or a good podcast, a good YouTube video, or you meet a guy like Brian and you hear him put things into perspective and it makes sense, and that's another thing. Brian's an obstacle remover and he's also a sense maker. He's a sensical guy. One of the things that he speaks about and he teaches is this idea, which is we practice all religions in our family, but Buddhism is one we really hold close. And this sounds very Buddhist, what Brian's saying, but he talks about the idea of embracing pain in order to avoid suffering. Now, to most people that have never heard anything like that, they're like, what? Speak to that a little bit, man, because it's obvious that pain, right?
Yeah.
But you've learned something about suffering, and maybe a lot of people need to hear a message that lets them know they're needlessly suffering.
Yeah. So I'll give a little bit of context as to where this concept came from, and then we'll talk about what it is. The reality of it is that 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, I was in a fog, right? I knew what was happening. I was extremely aware. I've got lots of memories around it, but I was also being guided through the process because I was a little kid, right? So although I was the one having endless surgeries, although I was the one having years of therapy, right? It was my parents that were intimately aware of the unceasing nature of all of those things. They were the ones that had to pay attention to where Brian needed to be, what Brian needed to be doing, how Brian was going to be recovering, what sources, and all these things. And so what they were able to see is that the idea of seeing their son grow up without the use of his left arm was a source of great potential suffering for them. So they willed themselves day in and day out to do what was necessary, to do what was tough, to embrace the pains required to ultimately strengthen and heal me. So whether it was intentional or not, what they did just based on their action was ingrained in me a philosophy and a way of living, which was this. Now, the part that we didn't talk about with this concept is that I believe that when we embrace pain to avoid suffering, it's also the way we gain freedom if we do it properly. So let's understand this concept. First, we need to understand what the narratives of the world are, right? Narratives of the world are literally this: reduce, eliminate, or avoid pain at all cost. I mean, that is all we hear, right? I mean, look at all the prescription drug medications to just continue to numb. And I want to be very, very clear. There is no vilification of prescription drugs. There is a place for many of them for many people in the part of their journey. But when it's simply just reduce the pain instead of deal with what's causing it, we start getting into this prescriptive society where we don't pay attention to the pain. Now, it made sense because it was a natural evolutionary response. 100 years ago, Dragon, you cut your leg, you could die. But that's not the world we live in anymore. And so we've got to redefine what this looks like. We need to understand what pain is first. Pain is defined as short-term, intermittent, and a direct cause from something, and then alleviated once that direct cause is removed. Now, what we do as humans is then we screw it up even further by putting adjectives in front of that word to change the definition and meaning, like acute and chronic. Now, acute maintains the definition, but chronic inherently changes it because it implies that it's no longer short-term and it persists after that direct cause is removed. So let's stop calling that chronic pain and call it what it really is: suffering. Now, we don't want to admit that suffering exists, particularly when it's the direct result of our choices. Whereas pain gets lots of attention because we feel it, it's real time, and we want to avoid it. We don't want to be in pain. Now, I want to be really, really clear here. I am in no way advocating that we put ourselves in pain's sake just for pain's sake. It's about identifying the proper pains between where we are and where we want to be and recognizing that those are a part of our path. So what does this concept look like in application? We can embrace the pain of hitting the gym for 30 minutes a day to avoid the suffering of aches and pains of a sedentary lifestyle. We can embrace the pain of a difficult conversation with a loved one or spouse to avoid being stuck in a loveless relationship or marriage when we actually want out, or being put into a position where we actually want to remain in that marriage, but it's going to be loveless and we've got to fix it. We can embrace the pain of the fit our kids are sure to throw by having them put down their mobile devices at the dinner table to avoid the suffering of years of lost meaningful conversation and connection that we'll never get back. As business owners, we can embrace the pain of firing our top salesperson who's contributing the most to top line growth to avoid the suffering of stagnant growth and losing all our other top talent because they were the greatest cancer in our culture. The reality of this is applies to every single thing in our lives. It's a matter of really starting to understand, how do we understand and acknowledge the suffering that we wish to avoid, identify the pains we tend to avoid and learn to embrace them, and establishes a habit for success in everything that we look. Because here's the thing, Dragon, I believe that we all must choose our pain or our suffering will choose us.
Such an amazing conversation on this topic alone. I'm while you're talking, just as this is my show and I'm interviewing you, and I'm like, I can't wait to hear this back again. Because you just dropped so much gold there. Um, here's an interesting question that just popped into my head. Because I mean, we could talk for hours about what success means, but let's just say people approach Brian with some sort of goal in mind and some sort of obstruction in front of them, and he'll explain a little bit more about his process of doing it. But what we identify when you interview people at the top of the mountain, whatever you perceive that means, physically, mentally, financially well, and you interview people like Brian, and you say, "Hey man, how did you get up here?" And you're hoping that he says, "Oh, I just fucking walked up the hill, man."
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, there's a trail. Actually, there's a cable car,
Yeah.
But what he does is he goes like this. He's like, "Well, sit down for a little while. Let me tell you the story." And what happens is you go, "Damn, another validation that, the obstacle is the way." So here's my question. If I was to bake a cake and that cake was called success, just from your experience, your own experience and your clients, how many of the ingredients to bake that cake are failure and obstacles versus wins?
Oh, 98% to 2.
So what do we
way
do?
more failure. Yeah.
Are you telling me, because when we talk about embracing pain, you gave these great examples, but if what we're saying is true, if I wake up tomorrow and I'm experiencing anxiety, frustration, letdown, whatever, all of those things, should I get excited that I'm on track to success?
So you should get excited that you have an indicator pointing you at what's important. I'm a big believer that pain points us at what's important, right? Failure also gives us feedback and hones our focus if we're paying attention. So you could look at pain and failure as similar categories, right? Depending on how you define it. But I don't view failure as a negative thing. I view failure as fuel, because it truly gives us the ability to see what's happening, what's going on, how do we refine, how do we pivot, is it in alignment? But here's the thing, like pain, right? Whether it's mental, physical, emotional, or spiritual, I believe that as people, we exist in those 4 categories, right? And so if pain exists in any one of those 4 categories, it's going to show up in some way. When pain exists in your life, it means there's a misalignment somewhere, meaning something is not working or something is in alignment with who you are or how it needs to be working. I won't ever say should be working, because should is a shame-based word. Needs to be working for you to get to where you want to go and become who you want to become. And so failure to me is huge. But we also have to understand, what does failure mean, right? If we're going to go through the process of understanding what does success mean, we need to understand what failure means as well. Now, what I would really like to advocate is that I actually have every single one of my clients define success for themselves. Don't define success based on how the dictionary's defined it. Like, what does success mean to Dragon? I'll tell you what it means to me. Success in my life is joy, freedom, and fulfillment. Do I have those things? Are they existing holistically? Right? And if they are, that to me, I'm living a successful life. So your very first question, what is it like to live in Brian's world? Well, I live a very successful life because I'm filled with joy, freedom, and fulfillment. And the closer I get to who I am, who I authentically am at the core, with all the layers I've shed from the world, the more I actually get to experience those 3 things. So failure drives us forward. Failure can be fuel towards where we actually want to be. Pain is where we have to start to identify. But again, to your point, you're feeling angst, you're feeling anxiety. By the way, emotions are a form of pain. They're an indicator around where we need to go. So I believe that pain and perspective and failure all kind of point us at what's important, give us feedback, and hone our focus if we're paying attention.
I love that word, indicator. I just wrote it down. That's whenever I hear words like that, I say to myself, oh, I'm going to probably write a lot about that now. Think about it. That's awesome. Very, very well done. I just love how smooth you are in reaction to questions. And just for my listeners, when you hear a guy like Brian speak, obviously he's a great speaker. He's been doing a lot of talking, but I'm asking this guy questions that require thought. And, he's very, very authentic and congruent. And I can just tell the way he's speaking. So Brian, just, before I get into, my crazy questions, and then, when we move to the latter half, okay, two questions. Who wakes up in the morning and needs to speak to Brian Bogert? And what is the process that, I don't want to say what's your secret to success, because I know we don't have time for that, but what's the process that somebody that wants to engage in, your services, what's the process that they're going to go through, step one, step two, step three, to get where they're going with your system, your strategy?
So it's going to look different based on where they engage, right? So I just have to say that very, very clearly, because there are people who engage just to have me be a speaker. We've got people that we work with one-to-one. We've got group coaching. We've got community. We've got self-led courses. So there's a spectrum, and then there's just content to consume. So I'm going to look at it through the lens of people who want to coach in some capacity, whether it's community, courses, group, or one-to-one, and we can just kind of go from there. I will tell you that most people know when they're ready for one-to-one and when they want to inquire. And so I would say that if you're in a position where you're like, I need one-to-one support, I want to go deep, I want to have this be as effective and efficient as possible, make sure that I get really intentional time, then I would say that shooting us an email at info@brianbogert.com is a great place to get it. There's also a coaching inquiry link on our website, brianbogert.com. I would tell you that often can also be a good funnel to determine whether or not group coaching is an option. And so it's really from there, it becomes a budgetary or a time commitment standpoint for individuals, or those who say, I just want to be in a pod of people that are going to all be pulling in the same direction. So people enter typically one of two ways. They either enter from the one-to-one journey first and go downward to see what actually fits, or they start at the baseline with some of our free stuff and they start building forward. So I would say that anybody who's interested in a self-led course, interested in learning more about what we're doing, if you go to nolimitsprelude.com, you will get access to a free course. It's over 30 minutes of video content and the first chapter of our No Limits You course. And what it's going to do is really start giving you some insights as it relates to the type of things you might unpack. You can see how we operate, how we communicate, how we're going to teach and lead in that self-led capacity. And then throughout that platform, there's multiple different ways to engage. I give one big caveat. This isn't just a lead gen. This isn't just like an email capture. We legitimately want to walk people through their own journey. And so do we communicate with you through this path? We do. Will we be bugging you and spamming you in perpetuity forever? No, because I don't believe in that in the personal and professional development space. We're never going to convince or sell anybody on anything. There's either alignment or there's not.
See, Brian's taking a big risk here by allowing people to really make up their minds if they want to work with him. And the risk is not fooling them into doing it. And that's a good risk to take. That's awesome. I love that. So, how would you define, like, are there stages? So whether people are coming in through the group or the one-on-one,
Yep.
What is the basic approach that you have to taking a human being, meeting them where they're
Yep.
at, and helping them?
So in the basic sense, we are trying to get people to really slow down and look at themselves in a way that they haven't before. It all starts with raising our level of awareness so that we can be intentional. We know that our minds process 11 million bits of information per second, but we're only consciously aware of about 40. So we are largely led by the unconscious. And so until we go through a systematic process of moving the unconscious to the conscious, the unaware to the aware, it's going to feel like we're victims. It's going to feel like we're fate. It's fate. It's going to feel like we have no influence or control over our destinies. So our simple goal is to allow people to lean into who they are before the world told them who to be, and then give them tools to unpack that. So we always start with awareness. If you look at our courses, we always begin with the end in mind, right? I do believe deeply in understanding like the purpose and legacy that we plan to leave and why we're here, and using that as a basis to align with who we are. And then we systematically build our lives in alignment so that it can become self-regulating over time. So the course guides people through asking themselves deep questions around who they need to be, who they need to become, what's imperative in their world to actually establish these things. We look at challenges, changes, and blind spots, and we break things down into actions that people can take, because it's our actions that demonstrate who we are to the world. In the one-to-one work, we go a little bit deeper. So in the one-to-one work or in the group capacity, we actually have the ability to start extracting information outside of self-guided prompts that get people thinking. You see, we want people to think about their thinking, think about their feeling, feel their feeling, and feel their feeling. And oh, by the way, if we can take those 4 things, the way that we can connect to think and feel, and we can layer that on top of the mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical realms that I talked about, and all of a sudden we have a 3-dimensional world that we know how to move through. And so we teach people how to see themselves more clearly, how to embrace the pains required to move forward in their lives. And then we spend a lot of time in our one-to-one and group work, because we have the ability to do so there, really helping people understand their emotional triggers, behavioral patterns, and environmental conditioning. So we do that often by helping people unpack their life, truly understanding the high points and the low points, and then recognizing where the patterns start to develop as a result of it. And when we start to see that truly, right, so often we've circled the same patterns in our lives multiple times, always wanting to be like, well, if I just get here, then I'll, well, let's stop playing that game, because nobody's coming to save you. Nobody's going to be your hero. And so we don't want to get anybody dependent on our stuff. We want to elevate and empower people to go do this themselves, free them of the shackles, if you will, of any courses or systems. And it's instead allow them to go perpetuate this change into the world. Because we talk about a 1 billion life impact. I'll be clear though, that's not Brian Bogert impacting 1 billion lives. That's collective impact. It's collective impact of aligning with thought leaders who are having similar impact in the world with, like you, like many others, who are genuinely here to try to help people experience joy, freedom, and fulfillment more holistically, to reduce the level of suffering on this planet. And so that is the journey. We have to help people see themselves more clearly through awareness, so then they can be intentional. And when we build our life in alignment, it does become self-regulating, and we can live with no limits.
I love that. It's like my good friend Jim Quick talks about being limitless. So, I'm always evaluating superpowers. That's why I say things like obstacle remover and all that. But Brian is also a circuit breaker and a cycle breaker. He just brought something up really valuable that, we don't know what we don't know. So sometimes we need a little bit of guidance, and to get into a community of people that are all becoming more self-aware, more conscious, which is the biggest battle, and just recognizing some things that you're allowing to happen that don't need to happen anymore. Okay, so awesome, man. You're just such an exceptional human being in the way that you explain things. And my audience likes to make sense of things, and you're very good at taking potentially things that make people very complex and making them simple to understand.
Oh, thank you.
So, couple of interesting questions. What is Brian Bogert's kryptonite?
It's the only thing that's binary in this world. It's if my wife and kids are not good. It's the only thing that'll cause me to walk away from everything we're chasing, everything we're building, all the impact we're having. Is if those 3 are not solid and good, I'm not good, and I will not be doing the things that I do. So it also includes the relationship that I have with them. It includes the dynamic and the connection that I have with them. And so when I say they're not good, it also means our family unit or our relationships are also not good. That's my kryptonite. That is the singular thing that will take me down.
So our kryptonite is the same. You were talking before about like defining success. I like to say, what's the marker that will prove to you that you've arrived at that thing called success? And for me, that's a tough one. And I've worked with some great coaches that always ask me this question, and I would partly answer it honestly and partly try to say what they wanted me to say. But I've come to the conclusion that I define success by the visual of one of my 2 sons or my daughter pointing at me and saying, "That's my dad." That's how I've done it. So I know you and I are alike in that.
You just gave me goosebumps, man. Of course we're aligned. Yeah.
What does Brian Bogert like most about people?
Wow. That's going to be a hard one to answer simply. I love how dynamic and different everybody is, while at the same how connected and similar we are. The divide in that concept just fascinates me. And the fact that we can be so similar yet so different simultaneously is truly the epitome of like neutrality and centeredness, if we can learn to embrace all of that. I'm deeply moved by human beings and the human experience.
Yeah, they're just so fascinating. And I just said there as if I'm not one.
Yeah. Outsider looking in.
Well, but that's what's so interesting. And I think it's important for people that are on the receiving end of this podcast or coaching from Brian or coaching from anybody or mentoring is to recognize that you're being led and guided and mentored by another human being. So there's a lot to be said about mentors and coaches serving themselves by serving others. I always say that the greatest gift that God has ever bestowed upon us is the ability to serve another human being to get what they want. I mean, there's no better, call it the currency of goodwill. I mean, and the fact that we get paid for it is awesome, but there's nothing better than that.
Couldn't agree more.
So curiosity has me wondering what you read, because I'm sure you're a reader. Give me one, maybe two killer books that you read in 2021. Sorry.
Yeah. So you referenced the title of it earlier. The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday. Was the first time I picked that up. And I will tell you, it was phenomenal. I would tell you that is one of the few books that I've actually read in book form, not listened to, cover to cover. And probably 75% of it is highlighted because I am so aligned with the philosophies in that book. I mean, The Obstacle is the Way is embrace pain to avoid suffering. So when I stumbled on it this year, I was like, I've never heard of Ryan Holiday. This guy's blown up. He's great. So that's one. Another one that I read this year that is a killer book. I've read a lot, so I'm trying to put my finger on the best one. I'm going to say The Way of the Superior Man by David Deida. I have really, really enjoyed that book. I've referenced it many times, and he breaks things down really truly into the masculine and feminine energies that exist, and they exist simultaneously within all of us. So again, with this idea of divide of differences and similarities, right? The more I kind of continue down my path, the more I see so many of those patterns developing, and he just does a phenomenal job of explaining how men can wake up to truly lean into who they are, their natural forms of energy, and be able to accomplish all the things they want in their life.
That's awesome. Yeah. So I'm 12 years practicing Stoic. So I know Ryan very well and Marcus Aurelius. If you like what you read with Brian, go read the book that he learned from, and that's Meditations.
I have. Yeah. I've read those. I've been reading philosophers and Stoics for a number of years now. That is definitely in alignment with the way I view the world. So
I always read books. I call it a scavenger hunt. It's like one thing leads to another. So like when I read a book, if I read something you read, I would find out where you learned something and go read that book. So Ryan Holiday, one of his mentors is Robert Greene. So he's just crushing it right now with books. He's an amazing author. So awesome, man. Just so much fun to share this time with you. And, on behalf of our audience, we're so blessed that, you exist, so on your birthday, I will wish you a happy birthday and say we are all better off for you being born. I give a big shout out and thank you to the nurse and to everybody else but especially you, because you've learned a lot of lessons. You've done the work. There's a very specific reason why there are so few people sitting at this table that has chairs for everybody at the top of the mountain. It's because they just need to find their way to do the work. But I believe everybody can, and with the help of people like Brian, you'll have a good guide and good support. So, Brian, just, is there anything you're promoting right now? I mean, just some things that I am enjoying with Brian. I mean, obviously you can go to his website. He gives away a free guide called the No Limits Guide. He kind of was alluding to that. But he's got a YouTube channel you can subscribe to, Bogert's Bullets, right?
Yeah.
And what I love about that is, Brian does a great way of just letting you into his real life. Not everybody does this. He lets you into his real life, like in his backyard, his hair's a mess. And he's telling you some just awesome things. Like I think he refers to the idea of giving you quick fixes that can have like big ramifications. But any other things that you're working on right now that people need to know about, or how to connect you?
So I would say if you go to iamnolimits.com, that is a landing page for all of the projects. We've got 4 different businesses. So we only talked about the coaching stuff, but we're all about the who. And again, it's about impacting in a bunch of different ways. So if you go to iamnolimits.com, that will give you an insight. I already referenced what that free course is. So I think that's a great place. You know, the thing I want to say though, I want to recap on one thing that you mentioned right there a second ago. One, I want to take a second and thank you, because you know, you have given me a lot of credit and a lot of grace from what you witnessed on stage. But I will tell you that there are few speakers that I see typically that I feel in such alignment with. And you took the stage with some very powerful lessons and did that as well. And I wouldn't have the opportunity to be here and speak to your audience today unless you had put in the work to create a platform to pour good into the world through this podcast and show. And so thank you for that and the opportunity to be with you. The other thing I want to hit on is you're right. I have put in a lot of the work, but I'm still putting in the work. And I want to make sure that's a message that everybody hears, because there is no final destination. It is only constant evolution of self. So whatever I think I see clearly today, whatever lessons I've learned, all I'm doing is continuing to stockpile and compound every single day, new lessons, new experiences, new ways of viewing the world. And if we all had the ability to view that versus feeling like we've arrived, the reality of it is I love The Second Mountain, because that I wish I could remember the name of the author of the book, because The Second Mountain highlights, it's like you talk about this top of the mountain that we get to. Guess what? We get to the top. It's inevitable. We're coming back down. We got to start climbing again. That's what life is. Even the folks up at the top. And so I just want to say that as a word of encouragement for every single person that's listening. And you use the word I love. I said earlier, nobody's coming to save you. Nobody's going to be your hero, but you can find guides. What I will say about that is 95% of people I don't believe are ready for coaching. So when I say guides, it could be your spouse, it could be your mother, your father, your brother, your kids, your friend. Find people who can help you see yourself more clearly because they have an outside perspective. Take yours, pair it with theirs, and then pick a path forward. And who you will be and who the world will receive will be exactly who you are.
Amen, brother. Amen. You know, you just remind, I don't remember who this guy was. He was like the CEO of, I don't know, some big company, getting a lot of attention. And he referred to what you just said about, you know, when you get to the top of the mountain, sometimes you have to reclimb it. This guy said, he brought up this concept of the false summit, meaning the idea, thinking that you've summited and then looking up and saying, crap, you know, and that's just such a valuable lesson in life. Brian, you're amazing. Thank you so much. Everybody that's listening to this in video format, in the description on YouTube, you'll have all of Brian's information and some highlights from the show. And if you are on the podcast, the same thing will be there so you can connect with Brian. Brian, you're an amazing human being. One of the goals that I'm going to set for 2022 is to align with more people like you so that I can selfishly improve my own life and all the things that matter most. And I thank you for being with us.
Man, thank you. Here's what I know about you. Anything you do to improve yourself, you're going to pass on to improve others. So you and I are very aligned, and let's continue chasing this collective impact together, brother.
Awesome. Well, have a great day, everybody. This has been another episode of Rise Up with Dragon, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye now.